On a dark Halloween night back in 1984, what was supposed to be a night of celebration twisted into a living nightmare. A brutal crime, so savage it felt like something ripped straight out of the darkest horror movies. Blood splattered everywhere, muffled screams cutting through the night, and a darkness so heavy it swallowed everything in its path. But hidden in the shadows, there was someone watching, a silent witness, someone who saw every detail with his own eyes, living through minutes that felt like pure hell, watching in fear, memorizing every chilling second of that cursed night. Who was this witness? And could his words be the key to unlocking the mystery behind this gruesome crime? The piece that finally reveals the truth everyone's been searching for? What you're about to hear might just change the way you look at Halloween forever. If you just stumbled on our story by chance, welcome. Here, you'll find thrilling, mysterious, and strange stories from all around the world. Subscribe and be part of the journey. And now, let's enjoy the details that make the story. In the city of San Jose, California, the 1980s were relatively calm. Back then, it wasn't the huge tech hub we know today. Just a city of around 350,000 people, known for being safe, quiet, and far from the violent crimes you'd expect in bigger places. But that calm image was shattered forever on Halloween night, October 31st, 1984. A night that went from innocent celebration to an unforgettable blood-soaked nightmare. That evening, as usual, kids in costumes ran from house to house, laughing, knocking on doors, and filling their bags with candy. Adults joined in too, dressing up and enjoying the fun. In San Jose, Halloween was something the whole community looked forward to. Nobody thought twice about opening their door to a masked stranger. It was part of the tradition. But at the same time, police were always a little on edge during Halloween. Because behind those masks, you never really knew who might be hiding. And on that night, that exact fear became horrifyingly real. Around 9:30 p.m., police dispatch received a frantic call from a man named Charles Herbert. His voice was trembling, almost hysterical, as he screamed for help, saying his wife had been stabbed and was lying in a pool of blood. Within minutes, squad cars and ambulances rushed to the scene. Neighbors crowded outside, terrified, whispering, trying to figure out what on earth was happening inside the house. Even before stepping through the front door, detectives noticed something strange in the yard. Halloween decorations, pumpkins carved into jack-o'-lanterns glowing in the dark. But one of them looked different. Its carved grin almost looked devilish, glowing with a sinister smile, and lying by the front door was a mask. Not a child's mask, but a large, menacing wolf mask, clearly made for a teenager or adult. But was it just part of the decorations? Or had it been dropped by whoever committed this crime? Inside the house, paramedics worked desperately to save the victim. The scene was nothing short of horrifying. Blood everywhere, splattered on walls, soaked into the carpet. The woman had been stabbed repeatedly, viciously, with deep wounds across her body. Her head was mangled from blows, and her left arm was nearly severed from the sheer number of strikes. This wasn't the work of a simple kitchen knife. The weapon was large, brutal, and sharp enough to leave terrifying damage behind. And then, chaos. A man suddenly stumbled toward the house, screaming and shaking uncontrollably. His clothes were drenched in blood. It was Charles, the husband. He was in complete shock, falling apart in front of the investigators. Neighbors quickly identified the victim as Doreen Herbert. a young woman 8 months pregnant, mother to a 4-year-old daughter. But the little girl wasn't there that night, which raised a terrifying question for police. Where was the child? Was she safe? When detectives tried to question Charles, things only got worse. He was heavily intoxicated, reeking of alcohol, incoherent and combative. He refused to answer basic questions, even his own name at first. All he managed to blurt out between screams was that their daughter was staying with neighbors. But his bizarre behavior, combined with the fact he was covered in blood, made him an immediate suspect. Officers cuffed him and put him in the back of a squad car. And that's when Charles began smashing his head against the window, hysterical, as if trapped inside his own nightmare. Meanwhile, paramedics carried Doreen's body into the ambulance, while detectives pushed deeper into the house. For all they knew, the killer could still be hiding inside. The atmosphere was chilling, dim lights flickering, Halloween props scattered across the floor, and the suffocating stench of blood hanging in the air. In the kitchen, one detail froze investigators in their tracks. Another jack-o'-lantern sat on a chair, but this one was different. Its orange surface was speckled and streaked with fresh blood, and as they moved closer to the entryway, their boots sloshed through nearly 2 centimeters of blood pooled across the floor. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a slaughterhouse. And then, a moment that stunned everyone. One officer noticed something small on the ground. At first, he thought it was a toy, maybe a doll. He warned his partner, "Careful, don't step on that. Could be evidence." But when his partner bent down for a closer look, his face went pale. He let out a horrified scream that changed the course of the entire investigation. "This isn't a doll. It's a fetus!" The scene was beyond anything out of a horror movie, but it wasn't fiction. It was real. Terrifyingly real. Who could be so heartless, so monstrous, as to rip an unborn child from its mother's body? And why? What could possibly drive someone to commit such a demonic act? After a full sweep of the house, police confirmed no one else was inside. At that point, the only suspect in sight was the husband, Charles. The good news? The couple's little girl, Deanna, was safe at the neighbor's house, and when officers spoke to her, she gave them something crucial. She had actually been inside the house when the attack happened. She had seen the killer enter. Once paramedics cleared out, detectives returned to study the crime scene carefully. The entryway told its own gruesome story. Blood spatter stretched across the walls and even up onto the ceiling. That told investigators the attack most likely happened right there, near the front door. But something else stood out. 3 distinct marks on the ceiling, as if a heavy weapon had smashed against it during the assault. This wasn't just a kitchen knife. This was something bigger, sharper, and deadlier. Maybe an axe or a hatchet. A weapon built not just to stab, but to hack and destroy. The tragedy only deepened. The fetus was already gone, declared the first victim, and just minutes later, the news no one wanted to hear arrived. Doreen herself had died in the ambulance. This was no longer a single homicide. It was now a double murder. Mother and child, taken in one brutal night. Despite their shock, detectives had to think logically. The obvious suspect was Charles. He was drenched in blood, head to toe. One theory jumped out. Maybe jealousy, maybe rage. Could it be he believed the unborn baby wasn't his, but investigators couldn't ignore another possibility, that the killer was an intruder. Someone who had broken into the home in disguise. At this stage, all they had were theories. Their only real witness was the 4-year-old little girl. So one female officer sat down with her at the neighbor's home, gently trying to pull out every detail the child remembered. And what Deanna described was both chilling and heartbreakingly clear. That day, her mom had taken her trick-or-treating around the neighborhood. They came home, and the two of them sat on the couch watching TV. A little later, the doorbell rang. Just kids in costumes. Her mom opened the door, handed out candy, and went back inside. Then her dad, Charles, told them he was stepping out for a bit. He said he wouldn't be long. He left. And only moments after he was gone, there came another knock at the door. But this one was different. Not playful, not light, heavy, hard. Her mom got up to answer. She couldn't have imagined death was waiting for her on the other side. The second the door opened, Deanna heard her mother's scream. Terrified, Doreen yelled to her daughter, "Hide! Quick!" The little girl ran and curled up behind the couch, shaking. From her hiding spot, she caught a glimpse of him, the killer. He wore a grotesque wolf mask and a dark mechanic-style jumpsuit. For a split second, she thought his eyes locked onto hers, and she froze in terror, tucking herself even deeper into her hiding place. What happened next scarred her forever. The man butchered her mother with savage, relentless strikes, and when it was done, he shouted through the house in a chilling voice, "If you talk, if you say a word, I'll come back and kill you." And then, he was gone. The little girl stayed hidden, trembling, as she listened to her mother's ragged, fading breaths, until silence fell. 2, maybe 3 minutes later, her father Charles walked back in. The moment he saw the horror before him, he screamed in disbelief, "What the hell happened?" He panicked, picked up the phone, and called the neighbor across the street, telling her his wife had lost the baby. The neighbor rushed over, and what she saw was pure devastation. The fetus lying lifeless on the floor, Charles in hysterics, unable to comprehend the scene. Only then did Deanna crawl out from her hiding place. The neighbor quickly scooped her up and carried her away, shielding her from the nightmare her young eyes had already seen too much of. The little girl told detectives that the man who attacked her mother was wearing the same evil wolf mask police had found lying by the front door. That detail gave her words incredible weight. She was only 4 years old, but the accuracy of what she described couldn't have been invented by a child. And just like that, investigators had their first solid piece of evidence. But the case only grew stranger. Officers noticed something unusual outside, the faint trail of blood drops in the front yard. The trail stretched from inside the entryway, across the lawn, and out toward the street. Carefully, they followed it, until it led them to a pedestrian bridge crossing over the highway. This discovery shook the investigation wide open. It strongly suggested that someone else had left the house after the attack, and that someone might be the real killer. Yes, Charles, covered in blood and acting erratic, remained the prime suspect. But this blood trail raised the possibility of another figure in the shadows. Was there a second intruder? Maybe even a hired killer? Or had someone taken advantage of Charles's brief absence to strike? The timing was razor thin. Charles left for just a few minutes, and in that tiny window, the murder unfolded. Was it coincidence? Or was the attack orchestrated with chilling precision? No one had an answer yet, and until they did, detectives refused to cross Charles off their list. Instead, they decided to dig deeper into Doreen's past, searching for any hidden motive, any old wound that might explain this horror. Through their investigation, they pieced together the life of Doreen Erbert. Born in California in 1952, she had built a career as a physical therapist. That very job was how she met her first husband, Michael Dennis. Michael worked in a local factory and struggled with hearing loss, which made speech difficult for him. It left him shy, withdrawn, and often battling depression. But when he met Doreen, everything seemed to change. To him, she was a lifeline, his anchor, the love he had long been searching for. They married quickly and soon welcomed a baby boy, Paul. But the marriage wasn't built to last. Constant arguments tore them apart, and by 1977, the couple divorced. Doreen won custody of Paul, while Michael had visitation on weekends. For Michael, the separation was devastating. He never fully recovered. Doreen, on the other hand, moved forward. She found stability again with her second husband, Charles, and in 1979, she gave birth to their daughter, Deanna. Life seemed to settle into a new rhythm, until tragedy struck. In February 1980, at the home she now shared with Charles, there was a swimming pool in the backyard. That day, 4-year-old Paul, her son from her first marriage, was visiting. At some point, while Doreen wasn't looking, Paul slipped outside. Somehow, the little boy managed to climb over the pool fence, and within moments, he fell into the water. By the time Doreen realized what had happened, it was too late. Paul drowned. The child she had cradled in her arms was gone in an instant. It was a wound she carried forever, an unbearable memory that never faded. On that cold October night in 1984, the threads of a brutal crime began to unravel, painting a scene more chilling than any horror film. The investigation into Doreen's murder took a dark turn when detectives uncovered details from her past, troubled relationships, and above all, the bitter history with her ex-husband, Michael Dennis. Michael had never healed from the tragic death of his son, Paul, who drowned in Doreen's swimming pool back in 1980. He carried that pain like a scar, buried deep, but never forgotten. In March of 1982, he even filed a lawsuit against her, accusing her of deliberately killing the child. The court, however, dismissed it as nothing more than a tragic accident. Losing that case only fueled Michael's rage. His resentment toward Doreen and her new life with her husband Charles grew darker with time. When investigators pieced this together, Michael Dennis became their prime suspect. He had the motive: revenge. Without wasting time, they tracked down his address and arrived at his home around 12:20 a.m., just hours after the murder. They knocked hard on the door. Inside, the sound of running water echoed, raising suspicion. It was as if Michael was trying to wash something away. The knocking grew louder until finally the door opened. Michael appeared calm, unnervingly calm. When they told him about Doreen's death, he showed shock, but strangely, not anger. He didn't say a single cruel word about her, despite all their history. That hesitation alone made the detectives second-guess accusing him outright. When they asked to search the house, Michael didn't hesitate. He signed the consent form. But in that moment, a detail jumped out. He tried signing with his left hand. When the detectives asked why, he said he was right-handed. Then, slowly, he revealed his right hand from beneath the table, heavily bandaged, with blood seeping through. Suspicious, they asked about the injury. Michael claimed he'd accidentally cut himself while carving a pumpkin for Halloween, trying to make a jack-o'-lantern. The explanation felt thin, especially with the weight of motive pressing down on him. When detectives asked for his ID, he said it was upstairs. 2 officers followed him up to the bedroom, but as he climbed the stairs, his movements raised the tension. He kept turning his head, staring at the detectives with a slow, unsettling gaze. One officer instinctively rested his hand on his gun, ready for anything. At the bedroom door, Michael stopped. He glanced at the detective, then walked toward the bed. The officer ordered him to halt. He didn't. And that's when they saw it, sitting right next to the bed. A handgun. In that instant, everything changed. The detectives realized Michael might have been planning to use it, whether against them or against himself. The tension in the room spiked, the air thick with uncertainty and danger. Michael Dennis was no longer just a grieving father with a grudge. He was now a man on the edge, mysterious, unpredictable, and possibly the key to unlocking the dark truth behind Doreen's murder. Inside Michael Dennis's house, detectives combed through every corner, searching for a clue that could break the case open. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In the garage, they spotted a clear bloodstain on the floor. Nearby sat a washing machine, still damp, as if it had just been used to erase evidence. The machine was empty, but the traces of blood around it spoke volumes, and it didn't stop there. Outside the house, detectives noticed more blood drops on the pavement. Suspicious, they turned to Michael's car parked out front. On the door handle, blood. On the steering wheel, more blood. At that moment, the decision became unavoidable. Michael Dennis had to be taken into custody. The case now had two prime suspects: Charles, the husband, and Michael, the ex-husband. But just as they were leading Michael toward the squad car, another detective rushed up with a shocking revelation. He had followed a trail of blood starting from Doreen's front door, through the yard, across the pedestrian bridge over the highway, and it ended right at Michael's house. The circle of suspicion was complete. Michael was injured, his hand bleeding, and the blood trail itself led from the crime scene straight to his doorstep. All signs pointed directly at him. Michael was taken to the station and placed under arrest, but the investigation wasn't finished. Detectives still needed answers from Charles, Doreen's husband. Charles was shaken, devastated by the loss, but when pressed, he denied any involvement in his wife's death. He insisted he could never hurt her. When detectives asked about his movements that night, he explained that he, Doreen, and their little daughter had gone trick-or-treating around the neighborhood. Later, when they returned home, he told his wife he was stepping out quickly to buy cigarettes and beer. To back this up, he produced a receipt from the store, claiming it proved he was away at the time of the murder. But the detectives weren't convinced so easily. They pointed to the blood covering him from head to toe. Charles explained that when he got back, he found the door open and Doreen lying in a pool of blood. In panic, he rushed to her side, tried to revive her, but slipped and fell in the blood-soaked floor, drenching himself in it. Was Charles telling the truth? Or had he staged the perfect alibi before committing the crime? Was it really just a coincidence that he left the house at the very moment the killer entered? Or was there something much darker beneath the surface? The questions hung in the air with no clear answers. For now, detectives decided to hold Charles in custody until morning. Once the store opened, they would verify the receipt and check the details for themselves. Now the case stood on a razor's edge. Michael, bleeding, suspicious, and tied to the crime scene by a trail of blood. Charles, the grieving husband with a shaky alibi and a story that raised more doubts than trust. The mystery was only deepening, and the true killer was still hidden in the shadows. Inside the interrogation room next to where Charles was being questioned, Michael Dennis sat face to face with two hard-nosed detectives. The first thing they did was bag up all his belongings, his blood-stained clothes, every trace of evidence, and log them for testing. The timeline was tight. The murder happened sometime between 9 and 9:30 at night. Yet Michael swore he'd been home since 4 in the afternoon, right up until the police showed up at his door. The detectives started with the basics. Had he ever worn that evil wolf mask at past Halloween parties? Michael flat out denied it. He said he'd worn other costumes before, but never that mask. Still, his denial wasn't enough. Not with the little girl swearing she saw the killer wearing it. Finding proof to tie Michael to that mask suddenly became everything. But there was a problem: the law. They couldn't hold him longer than 48 hours without solid evidence. The only way to lock him in was through the blood. If the blood they found at his place matched the blood at the crime scene, it would be game over. But this was the 1980s. DNA wasn't an option yet. All they could do was compare blood types, a process that took way longer than the time they had. By the next morning, the case had blown wide open in the press. Headlines screamed, "The Halloween Night Massacre." The whole city was on edge, everyone reading about the husband and the ex-husband as the prime suspects. Police even put out a call to the public. If anyone had seen a man in a wolf mask that night, they needed to come forward. Meanwhile, little Deanna, the daughter of Doreen and Charles, was safe with her grandparents. And the detectives shifted their focus back to Charles, determined to test his story. They went to the store where he claimed he bought cigarettes that night. The clerk confirmed it. Yes, Charles was there. Even better, the security cameras caught him inside the store at the exact time the murder went down. The receipt he'd kept lined up perfectly. His alibi was airtight. Charles was cleared, and he walked free. That left Michael, and when a judge granted a full search warrant on his property, the forensics team went in hard. What they found inside his outbuilding was straight-up horrifying. 2 wooden coffins, handmade, one a little larger than the other, heavy iron weights, body bags stacked and ready, and a detailed map of the San Francisco Bay. The plan was chillingly clear. Michael was preparing to stuff his victims inside the coffins, weigh them down, and sink them into the bay where no one would ever find them. It didn't stop there. In his garage, investigators found a receipt for an 18-inch machete from a nearby hardware store. The wounds on Doreen's body, and even the 3 slash marks left on the ceiling in her entryway, matched the size of that blade perfectly. When a forensic specialist tested a machete of the exact same length in her home, the alignment was dead on. The evidence looked damning: a coffin the size of Doreen, another small enough for a child, maybe even Deanna. It wasn't just a murder. It looked like Michael had been plotting an entire massacre. But here's the shocking part. Even with all that, the evidence still wasn't enough in court. Without the blood test results, they had no legal way to hold him. And the clock ran out. After 48 hours, Michael Dennis walked out of jail. The question haunting everyone was simple and terrifying. Did the police just let the real killer walk free? After Michael Dennis walked free from jail, the entire city was on edge. Fear hung in the air. No one knew what this disturbed man might do next. But just as the suspicion around him was starting to fade, fate handed the investigators a break, completely by chance. During one of Michael's earlier interrogations, police had confiscated his clothes. In his pocket, they'd found a small black notebook. At first glance, it didn't look like much, just a list of names. Friends, acquaintances, a few women he knew. But one detective had an idea. Call every single name. Maybe someone, anyone, knew something, and that's when the bombshell dropped. One of Michael's friends told police that the year before, at a Halloween party, Michael showed up wearing that same evil wolf mask, the very mask police had recovered at Doreen's house. And then she added one more thing. There were pictures. The moment investigators saw the photos, there was no denying it. Michael Dennis, clear as day, smiling in the camera, wearing the exact same mask. Confronted with the evidence, Michael stayed cold. He shrugged it off, insisting a picture didn't prove anything. Anybody could have worn that mask, he said. But detectives weren't buying it. They went back to a judge, secured another search warrant, and tore through Michael's home. In his closet, they found the exact same outfit he'd been wearing in the photo. The pants, the jacket, the shirt, all of it matched perfectly. Then came the final nail in the coffin. 4 days after the murder, the blood analysis results arrived. The findings were devastating for Michael. Doreen's blood was discovered inside Michael's home, and Michael's blood was found inside Doreen's. The case was complete. The wolf mask was found at the crime scene. The outfit from the photos was in his closet. His fresh hand injury matched the medical examiner's report. His blood mixed with Doreen's at the scene. The receipt for the machete. The coffins waiting in his shed. On November 5th, 1984, police moved in. Michael Dennis was arrested once and for all. Even as they cuffed him, he repeated the same desperate line over and over. "I'm not the killer. Why are you arresting me?" But the motive couldn't have been clearer. Michael blamed Doreen for the death of their son years earlier. He resented her new life, her new husband, her happiness. He had lost everything: his child, his court case, his sense of control. While she built a future, he sank deeper into rage, and on Halloween night, that rage exploded. He slipped on the wolf mask, stormed into Doreen's home, and butchered her with horrifying cruelty. He wanted to rip the unborn child from her womb. He wanted to kill Deanna, her little girl. He wanted to erase the entire life Doreen had built without him. But what Michael never planned for was his own blood betraying him. In his frenzy, he cut himself. His blood spilled across the walls, across the ceiling, mixing with Doreen's, marking every inch of the crime scene. He stumbled out of the house, leaving a bloody trail across the yard, over the pedestrian bridge, and all the way back to his home. Somewhere along the way, he ditched the machete and his bloody clothes, none of which have ever been found. And yet, one haunting question still lingers. Why did he leave the mask behind? The most logical answer? Michael wore glasses, and behind the narrow slits of that mask, he couldn't see clearly, especially once it was smeared with blood. Maybe in the chaos, he ripped it off to move more freely. But in doing so, he left behind the single piece of evidence that would seal his fate forever. Michael Dennis's trial finally began 4 years after that bloody Halloween night, and all eyes were locked on the courtroom. The man who turned a holiday into a nightmare was now facing the death penalty. Even with all the overwhelming evidence stacked against him, Michael still pled not guilty. By then, Doreen's daughter Diana had turned 8 years old. She was the only survivor from that house of horror, and the key witness, but she was terrified. Michael's words still echoed in her mind. "If you talk, I'll come back for you." The thought of facing him in court made her tremble. The judge did something unprecedented. He ordered Michael to keep his head down on the table so Diana wouldn't have to look at his face while testifying. And when she finally stood up, her little voice shaking, she confirmed what everyone suspected, that Michael was the man in the evil wolf mask that night. Her innocent words carried more weight than anyone could imagine. But the real twist came later when Michael's lawyer changed his plea. Michael admitted to the murder, but claimed insanity. The defense argued that Halloween itself had triggered him. Seeing kids laughing and running door to door, dressed in costumes, reminded him of the son he lost. In his mind, the only person to blame was Doreen. They said he heard dark voices urging him to take revenge, and Halloween gave him the perfect chance to hide behind a mask. Still, investigators revealed something chilling. Michael hadn't even known Doreen was pregnant at the time. That made the crime even more brutal and unforgivable. On August 16, 1988, the verdict was handed down: death sentence. But even after all these years, the punishment hasn't been carried out. Michael Dennis remains behind bars, his fate suspended in limbo. As for Charles, Doreen's husband, he carried a heavy burden of guilt for the rest of his life. He always blamed himself for leaving the house that night, convinced that if he had stayed, none of it would have happened. But Diana, who grew up remembering it all, told him something he never forgot. If you'd been home, Michael would have killed you too. I would have lost both my parents that night. In the end, those few minutes Charles stepped out may have been the only reason Diana wasn't left completely alone. And that's where today's story ends. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us keep bringing you more unbelievable true crime stories. And if you're hungry for more, make sure to check out our video on Jack the Ripper, one of the most infamous killers in history, or dive into the haunting mystery of Malaysia Flight MH370 and the legendary search that followed. Both stories are packed with twists you won't want to miss. See you in the next one.